He had been a troublemaker on the Native American reservation all week. His profanity landed on every counselor who tried to work with him. Irritated but undeterred, our group refused to kick Tony out. Finally, toward the end of the week, Tony's steely veneer gave way for a moment, and he told a member of our group this had been one of those weekends when his mother left him and his 6-year-old brother at home while she went to the casino. 3 days at home to find themselves something to eat. Later that afternoon, after most of the other campers had picked up their brown bag lunches and left for home, Tony came back to a member of the group. "Is there enough for me to take an extra sandwich home to my brother?" It's hard to say exactly how I felt when I heard this story. Sad, yes. Angry, yes. Because I've heard this kind of story so many times before. And I can understand how the hearts of the disciples came to be so hardened. I can understand why they had so little faith in the miracles of their God. Maybe just down the road from where they were staying, there sits something like the trailer park I know that is on this reservation, built in 1999, just after a tornado came through and tore the village apart. FEMA promised that this would be a temporary trailer park. But just in case, they built little concrete bunkers nestled in between each trailer where the children run when the storms come again. It's called a temporary trailer park, though no plans exist to replace what was lost. Maybe the disciples had heard that kind of a story before. Surely they had seen this kind of poverty before. They had heard the promises made and broken by governments and powers across the globe. Maybe they saw the same old story among their own people, just like I saw it in Guatemala, where children still die from diarrhea. Maybe they experienced it like I did in my hometown south, where the white man still lives in the plantation house, overlooking the trailer parks where little shacks used to house his great-grandfather's slaves. Maybe the disciples stood in the midst of it like I did among the boarded-up neighborhoods of Baltimore, where there are still too many families fighting to keep the drug dealers off their block. Maybe those disciples had stood among the poor, among the hungry, among the suffering, among the expendable of their society for so long that their first thought wasn't so much compassion, wasn't as many tears as they expected. Maybe their first feeling was the numbing of their hearts, brought about by the reality of what they had seen in their world time and time again. This will never change. The FEMA trailers will still be there in 2018 or 2020 unless they burn them down before then. The kids in Guatemala will still be drinking dirty water next year and the year after that. The drugs will still rule the blighted neighborhoods regardless of who is elected our next mayor. And what about little Tony on the reservation? The disciples know as well as I do that next weekend Tony's mom will be at the casino again. What little hope she has fed into the greedy mouths of the slot machines. If she has a good weekend, maybe Tony won't get a beating. The only difference between last weekend and the next is that Tony will have one more meal that he'll have to cover on his own. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. We can condemn the disciples for their unbelief, for their lack of faith. But who really believes that the hungry that we know will be fed? Who really believes that God will work a miracle to make it happen? Look around at the world. Go ask the children of Guatemala. Go ask the plantation workers across our nation. Go ask the trailer park residents on the reservation. Go ask the mothers in the inner city. Go ask Tony. These miracles do not happen. The story isn't even crafted in a believable way. Verse 52 is in the wrong place. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Just before Jesus walks on water, just after the disciples cross on over the sea and land on the shore. There are no loaves on the water. Verse 52 is in the wrong place. It ought to come at the end of the feeding story, just after verse 44. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Clearly, some later scribe has rather clumsily inserted this Jesus walks on water fable into the middle of the feeding of the 5,000. One is about multiplying loaves, the other is about recognizing who Jesus is. All of which serves to undermine the likelihood that either one of these stories ever even happened at all. We know what is possible, and this is not it. Loaves do not multiply. People do not walk on water. The disciples know this. They are smart, sophisticated people. They know what powers, what barriers exist to keep the people in the wilderness from getting their fair share. They have spent most of their lives on the waters. They know what happens when you step out of a boat. Disciples are smart, sophisticated people like us. Clean water in the third world. The problem is huge. There are too many complicating factors. Affordable, safe housing for people on the reservation. The problem is enormous. It's been around for decades. There are too many barriers. Safe, drug-free neighborhoods in the middle of the inner city. Go ask the mayor. Go ask the police commissioner. Go ask the city council members. Go ask the people who live there. The problems are too big. And ask any teacher who knows him just what his chances are for a bright future. Jesus never addresses these major problems. No discussion about Roman economic policies that keep the poor poor and the rich in power. No discussion of food distribution issues. No discussion of balance sheets or budgets or trade deficits. And it must drive those smart, sophisticated disciples crazy with all of the barriers that they see, all of the obstacles that they know, all of the truths that cannot be sidestepped so easily. All Jesus can say is, give them something to eat. But this is a deserted place. There is no food here. Give them something to eat. But the hour is too late. No one's selling food now. Give them something to eat. We don't have enough money to feed the crowd. Give them something to eat. We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. There is not enough. Give them something to eat. That's all Jesus can say. Maybe because he believes that the question of whether or not there is enough is never finally answered by pie graphs and economic charts, is never finally answered by distribution capacities and supply chains, is never finally answered by what passes as our sophisticated knowledge. The question of whether or not there is enough is first and foundationally a matter of faith. Do you believe there is enough to make everyone's water clean? Do you believe there is enough for everyone to live in clean, safe neighborhoods and adequate housing with enough work to put food on the table for everybody? Do you believe there is enough money, there are enough dedicated people, there is enough hope to make it possible for Tony and his little brother to have a future? Do you believe? You can't blame the disciples for being so hard-hearted. They know there is no way they can sustain that belief. The suffering in the world is too great. The suffering of their people is too much. The powers that be are too strong. The problems of the world are too big. There are many more Tonys in the world than there are resources or people to love them. It's no wonder that the disciples were astounded to see Jesus walking across the water. It's no wonder that they didn't even recognize him standing right in front of them on the sea. They did not understand about the loaves. They did not understand that the problem with feeding the crowds wasn't about quantity or resources. It wasn't their own hardness of heart. It was their own hardness of heart, their own inability to believe that God will do what we have determined cannot be done so that there is enough for all God's children. Verse 52 is in the right place after all. They could not recognize Jesus because they still did not believe that he had the power and the will to make a way where there is none. They still did not understand that God is in the business of calling into question every absolute that grows out of their cynicism. Cynicism that passes as what is settled and what is possible. Nothing can be done about a hungry crowd on a hillside outside Jerusalem. Nothing can be done about trailer parks in South Dakota. Nothing can be done about dirty water in Guatemala or El Salvador or the rest of the third world. Nothing can be done about drug neighborhoods in Baltimore's inner city. Nothing can be done about a kid named Tony trying his best at age 10 to imitate what it means to be an adult. Nothing can be done unless you believe, in the face of all of our intelligence gathering, in the face of all of our rational techno-wizardry, that our God has made the commitment that something can be done, that something will be done, that something must be done, even when we do not have the faith to imagine that there is enough. You know, nothing can be done is not in God's vocabulary. The God whose compassion leads him into the trailer parks of South Dakota, into the rat-infested row houses of inner-city Baltimore, into the hillside slums of Guatemala, into the shacks of our nation. The God who long before we've pulled out our pie charts to see how much we're willing to spare from our overweight storehouses. That God who dares to imagine that there is enough to go around. Tony came back to a member of our group and asked her, "Is there enough for me to take an extra sandwich to my brother?" And she said, "There is enough."